lest we forget.
My name is Dominic Raab, and I'm a Tory. I don't support the Human Rights Act, and I don't believe in economic and social rights.
I've just made a pretty big claim. Some might say an extraordinary claim. And extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Just what makes me imagine that this society, this land of my birth, is becoming the very thing we opposed not only in wartime, but on British streets as well. This is the land of Cable Street, of Brick Lane, where thousands of anti-fascists took to the streets to oppose Mosley's Black Shirts and Griffin's National Front. It's the land of the Levellers, the Chartists, Magna Carta, the Battle of Peterloo, where working-class artisans gathered peacefully to hear speeches against an oppressive regime and were massacred by order of that same regime and the king at sword point by local yeomanry and cavalry officers. So before we get too smug about our anti-fascist credentials, we should also bear in mind that in each of those famous conflicts, the police, the establishment and the government sided with the fash. The people in power followed the money, as people in power often do. And in recent years that money has been in the hands of far-right donors and think tanks and agitators from Breitbart to Cambridge Analytica. From eugenicist Dominic Cummings to disaster capitalists like Aram Banks and Jacob Rees-Mogg.
And I don't think the state can do everything. That it tries and it provides a base of welfare that should allow people to make ends meet during the course of the week. But on some occasions, that will not work.
Dictatorships, be they of the right, like fascism, or the left, like communism, can spring from various motivations, from ideology, religiosity, think medieval Christianity, idealized mythological ideas of racial purity, or simply greed. Aristocracies and monarchies such as our own from 1066 up until more recently than any of us would care to admit. What they all have in common is control, simple, superficial ideas and rhetoric, and a scapegoat. Fascism needs a bogeyman, a threat to scare people with, and with which to provide a common cause to bind people together.
But there's no such thing as moderate Islam. If you actually understand what the teachings are, then it can be interpreted in that. The problem is it's a ragbag of contradictory nonsense.
This step seems to be vital. If you can first unite the people in the face of a common threat, even a made-up threat, then you can get them to agree to what follows. And there's an awful lot to follow. Ideally, that bogeyman should be easy to identify. Religious groups, for example, whose customs are unknown to the majority and whose clothing makes them easy to spot. For Hitler and the Nazis, that scapegoat group was made up of Jews, Romanis, disabled citizens and most foreigners, especially those from Eastern Europe and the Baltic states. Those who opposed the trade unions, most of the churches, and of course the left wing, were denounced as enemies of the state. Here in modern UK it's a little different. But change the words a bit, Jew for Muslim, disabled for scrounger, Romany for traveller, and you come pretty close. Once you've identified your target groups, then the propaganda begins. The lies and slanders, the deliberate misrepresentations of cultural norms and behaviours, and, of course, the threat directed at everyone else. As was attributed to Goering, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That's easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked and denounce the pacifists for lack of patriotism in exposing the country to danger. It works the same way in any country.
We want to get out of the European Union because Merkel's sending these people to us to rape our children. Stand up, people. Enough's enough.
The trick is to make people fearful. They can fear for their lives, their society, or their livelihoods. They can fear for their children, even for poorly defined things like purity and tradition, as you slowly build up a picture of imminent threat in the minds of the population. And then you need to come up with a mechanism, a way to convince them that disaster is coming. And this is what it looks like. Once you have a mechanism, you can start to create changes to stop it, to protect the people from your made-up threat by removing their rights and their existing protections on the grounds that it stops the aggressor too. Adolf Hitler used the fictional protocols of the Elders of Zion as a way to demonstrate the Jewish threat to enslave the world. That was the mechanism he used to persuade the Germans to fear. In UK, the mechanism's obvious. Muslims want to take over and impose Sharia law. And Europe, a political and commercial entity that few people understand and even fewer have had the time to fact-check, is hell-bent on letting them.
South African farmers now make up around 5%, so 5% whites left in South Africa. And they are preparing to make a final stand. They are retreating to defendable space. And they say they will die in their boots for the love of their land. And as I watch my Jewish friends now leaving Paris, leaving London, leaving Germany, I wonder where we will go. I wonder where is our Israel. And the saddest emails I ever receive are from the elderly who tell me that they're glad their time is nearly up so they won't have to see their country fall.
Create the threat of immigration, especially by Muslims, blame the EU for allowing it, despite the fact that the EU contains no Muslim states and that the relevant treaty comes from the United Nations, and then campaign to leave the EU with all its human rights protections, with a simple slogan about sovereignty thrown in for good measure. Let's listen to Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab.
My name is Dominic Raab and I'm a Tory. I don't support the Human Rights Act and I don't believe in economic and social rights.
But hang on, I hear you cry, Brexit's what people voted for. That's not a Nazi thing, that's democracy. Well, yes. Except that, according to opinion polls in 2010, only 1% of the UK population thought that European membership was a political issue worth their time. It wasn't until the propaganda machine began that anyone cared. And who started that propaganda? It's no coincidence that we can't leave the European Convention on Human Rights unless we leave the European Union first, and Nazism can't function as long as the European Convention is in place. That's the whole point of the Convention, to prevent Nazism and fascism from ever getting a foothold in Europe again. Suddenly, we're able to bow out of the human rights protection set up shortly after World War II. Suddenly, we've lost protections for workers' conditions, employment rights, healthcare, life, education, access to fair hearing, and a whole lot more that kept us safe for decades. Of course, Brexit's a done deal, we won't labour on that. It's yet to be revealed whether or not this type of Brexit agreement will be good for the nation, and much will depend on whatever trade deals we can pull off over the next 10 to 20 years or so. That's not the point of this little film, but it is worth bearing in mind that this country could never advance much further towards fascism, toward Nazism, without Brexit. And now we're out. Well, let's just see.